We are in the middle of a series. Actually, we started last week. We started a series called Joyride. And Joyride is not what you think. We're not encouraging to go out and steal a car and ride it joyously. That's not what we're trying to communicate. So don't think that. We're thinking different. We're thinking a little bit different than, running and stealing a car and having fun. But what we are doing is, what we're trying to say is that euphoric feeling of joy and excitement that you would have if you did that, maybe, you can have that in Christ. And how do we get that? How do we have that feeling of freedom and joy in Christ? And to carry it with us throughout life and forever. And to have that expectantly in all of life's turns. That's kind of what we're communicating, is how to have joy, how to have freedom, how to have excitement in life. And so that's the purpose of what we're doing. And last week we talked about where to find joy. They get excited in there. And they get loud. And there's very few times that they forget to close the door, but most of the time they have to close the door. Because somebody's going to get distracted, and it's usually David or I. We like to blame it on David, though. Right? But I will get distracted too. So, so that's kind of where we've been. Where does joy come from? There's a whole bunch. You can go on our Facebook page. We promote it. We have a YouTube page. We have all that. For the most part, we have every social media you could imagine, and we use some of them. But you can catch up on that later. I won't catch you up. Let's see. Alice Redding committed a murder and was sentenced to life in prison. He was a convicted felon who spent nearly half of his life spent behind bars. And in prison, he was a smuggler who could get anything that you needed or wanted as long as you had the price, right? He could get it for you. Unlike most prisoners, he admitted his crime. He owned up to it, and he owned up to his punishment that he was given, and he wasn't much different from any other prisoner until he met another prisoner. Another prisoner who lived differently, who lived a little bit different, who basically set his life to make life beautiful and change. And he met Mr. Redding, and he challenged his thoughts on life outside the walls of prison, his thoughts on life inside the prison. And he set out to make the prison system around him better and the people around him better. As long as Alice's friends served his time, he served it well, trying to bring about hope and change. Alice's friend Andy got out earlier than he did, though. And on Mr. Redding's third parole, he had gotten to the place where he knew that he could do life outside of prison walls, and he was rehabilitated and ready to go. And so he was released. And because of his friend, he had a new outlook on life and the outside world. In fact, he said this is one of the things he said about his entry into the world. For the second time in my life, I'm guilty of committing a crime, parole violation. Of course, I doubt they'll toss up any roadblocks for that, not for an old crook like me. I find I'm so excited I can barely sit or hold a thought in my head. I think it's the excitement only a free man can feel. A free man at the start of a long journey whose conclusion is uncertain. I hope I can make it across the border. I hope to see my friend and shake his hand. I hope the Pacific is blue as it is in my dreams. I hope. His friend lived by a choice. Get busy living or get busy dying. And really, that's a good choice, right? It's a good choice. Get busy living or get busy dying. And Mr. Redding started living by that. And if you're like me, and you watch Shawshank Redemption, and you've been Shawshank about 800 times because it's on TNT, you figured out, I'm talking about Mr. Red from Shawshank, and Andy DeFreeze is the one who got out. He dug his way out. Anyway, I don't know why I did that for you. But, anyway, so Mr. Red got out, goes to Zihuatanejo, Mexico, and they meet up and they hug and they shake hands on the beach. And they live by that idea. Get busy living or get busy dying. Get busy living and get busy dying. And like Anthony and Redding, the writer of Paul gets to a place in his life where he kind of lives this. And he says it differently, but he uses this statement. He says it differently. And we're going to discuss that part. But the first thing he says is, for me to live is. And I'm not going to give you that verse until later. But what I want to do is, if you're new here, we simply want you to engage with people around you. We have a discussion question. And so if you're sitting by yourself and you've been here regularly back here, you just move, Leah, and sit to where you get to talk to somebody. But we have a simple discussion question. Look, if you're here and you're going, I don't really want to talk, that's okay. We don't care if you talk or not. But what we want you to give you an opportunity is to think about a question, to talk about something with someone, because we don't want you to just come here, never meet anybody, never engage in anything, and then go home. We want to engage. We want to be a relational church. So we have a discussion question that's meant to kind of get your brain thinking on a subject. And at Easter, our question was simply, what is your Easter tradition? Sometimes they're very simple. Today is a fill in the blank. It's not even a question. For me to live is whatever. And so that's your question today, and we're going to continue to discuss that. If you know the Bible verse, don't do the Sunday school answer. I mean, you can. I probably would. That's who I am. But what is life to you? So we're going to give 5 minutes, and we're going to discuss that. Ready? Break. For to me to live is half of a sentence written by Paul the Philippians. My hope is this morning you will consider all of that you listed during the discussion, or that you listed in your head, or you thought through, and you would reconsider it to be what Paul wrote in the Philippians. For me to live is Christ. For me to live is Christ. For today, just consider what your life would be like if for you to live is Christ. Meaning, what would it be like if you put Jesus first in your life? What if Jesus became life for you? Consider that. What would it be like? So we're in Philippians, written by Paul, after visiting, and he was in prison, in a Roman prison, and a bunch of men went to go see them. They knew that he was there. It was a much probably like Shawshank. They probably called it that as Rome. They already knew that Shawshank was awful, or whatever. You've probably been there. You were from New York. I don't even know. It's in Ohio, actually. So it doesn't have anything to do with New York. But he's in prison for believing in Jesus. I don't know what I'm trying to say there. The Jerusalem, Israelites, my goodness, how did I miss that word? They had arrested him because they didn't want Jesus. They had already tried to kill Jesus. And now he's making his way through Paul. And Paul was like the elite religious Jew. He knew it all. He had it all. He lived the life. He was the one that was there when Stephen died and was martyred for the first time. He gave the get it okay. And so he is like the prime Jew. And then he met Jesus on the road to Damascus. And Jesus changed his life and said, why are you persecuting me? And from there on, his name was actually Saul then, but they changed his name to Paul. We discussed that. I mean, you got to change your name. If you kill Christians and you kill people and Jesus comes to you, you got to change your name. You got to be different, because everybody was scared of Saul anyway, so that's probably a good move on their part. On Jesus' part, he does have a plan. He is really good at what he does, and I mean, he does what he does. So, but 4 people came to visit him. And he wrote them letters. He wrote their people letters. So 4 of them came from Asia, which is today Turkey. And they came from different cities. They wanted to check in on Paul, had to give him supplies and help him and pray with him and be with him. And then he wrote them all letters. And really, if Rome would have known what those letters meant when they left Rome, they would have apprehended them and secluded those letters and never let them go. Because Paul wrote those 4 letters, and they become a part of the New Testament, and they were the essential founding place on the church, on Jesus, and living it out. And you have 4 men who take that out. Epaphroditus from Philippi took the letters to Philippians. Taket, I can't even say that word, from Ephesus, went to the Ephesian letter. Epaphras from Colossae had the letter to the Colossians. Onesimus from Colossae went to Philemon and gave him a letter. And here we are, we're reading the Philippian book brought by that person. Golly, I can't think of those names. Epaphroditus. And here we are. Paul sat in a prison cell awaiting his hearing with Nero and reflected on life. He reflected on what he did and where he'd been, what it meant to live in Jesus. As he did, he penned the Philippians this, and he imagined, if you imagine for a second sitting with him, sitting in that cell. It's dark, it's gloomy, it's uncomfortable, it's stinky, it's gross. You don't want to be there. It isn't a place where you would expect to find some optimistic view, some positive thinking, some growth mindset. You wouldn't find that. You would think that he would be negative, he would be distraught, he would be awful. But no, Paul's not like that. He sits in prison and he's thinking of ways, how can I help people understand Jesus more and get to know him better? I want to live my life and to the end bring people to Jesus. He lived and sat in joy. Even in his moment, he lived in joy. And instead of being in the dumps awaiting death, he lived his life to grow people, to influence people, to bring hope and change and beauty. And he did that all his life. And it's possible to find that Christ can give you joy and freedom in the roughest parts of your life. I think we can learn two things before we get into a text. I want to give you two things about application of living through your own personal prison cell. Because sometimes we get in our own personal prison cell. Sometimes life is rough. And here are two things I want you to just remember, jot down, think about, whatever you do. The first one is, don't get so self-consumed in your own personal prison that you don't share your faith with people around you and you don't encourage them. Don't get so self-consumed in your own personal prison that you don't share your faith with the people around you and encourage the people around you. And the second is this. People around you are watching the way you handle troubles in life and when you handle them in faith. And it gives them confidence to do the same. So if you're in a place where you're in a personal prison, in a rough time, walk by faith. Be encouraged. Stand tall. Does it mean it's going to be rough? Does it mean it's going to get easy? No. No. But he does say he'll go with you. He'll walk with you. He'll help you. There is freedom and joy in Jesus. Even in the roughest place of life, you can find that. I've got a kindergarten or second grader. Some of y'all know them. They're over there. If you watched any, you'll figure out who they are. But when I first started dropping them off at school, my typical prayer was Lord, protect them as they go. Then I started thinking about that and started seeing the world around us and thinking, I just need God to see them through whatever they go through. He's there. He's going to protect them. Sometimes he chooses not to, but he always promises to see us through. And so I pray that often. So if you're in your own personal struggle, I'd love to pray for you. I'd love to walk with you. I'd love to do that. Jesus is there trudging with you. Don't think that he's not. He loves you and wants you to be there. Don't go back and get into the corner of your prison cell and just sit there and think of the gloom and doom. Think of Jesus. Think of joy. Think of freedom. Because he's there. And he's there walking with you. But we're going to read the passage. It's in Philippians 1, verse 20. And we're simply going to walk through that. If you're new to the Bible, or if you don't have a Bible, I would love to get that for you. We have a card called the Jesus Bible. It's a Jesus card. I try to follow Jesus. There's no check mark, just right on there. Hey, I don't have a Bible. I'd love to talk to you about get one. I'd love to get one, not make it awkward or anything, just I'd love to do that for you. Simply put it in the bucket as it goes by later today, and we will help you out. I'd be honored to do that. But let's read the text. For I fully expect and hope that I will never be ashamed, but that I continue to be bold for Christ, as I have been in the past. And I trust that my life will bring honor to Christ, whether I live or die. Here comes our sentence. For to me, living means living for Christ, and dying is even better. But if I live, I can do more fruitful work for Christ. So I really don't know which is better. I am torn between two desires. I long to go and be with Christ, which would be far better for me. But for your sake, it is better that I continue to live. Knowing this, I am convinced that I will remain alive so I can continue to help all you grow and experience the joy of your faith. And when I come to you again, you will have even more reason to take pride in Christ Jesus because of what he is doing through me. Paul is reflecting on his current state of life and his longing for heaven. He knows he is nearing the end of his life on earth and is about to reach the prize of heaven. Nearing death has a way of removing those things that are not important in life. Instead, it gives you a pointed focus of what is important. And here we find Paul thinking through that. And that's what this next passage is about. Paul is focusing on Philippians, on what is important in life. He's reminding them, hey, I'm here, I'm approaching death, but these things are what we should focus on. We'll continue. Above all, you must live as citizens of heaven. Let's be honest. If we walk through life thinking we were citizens of heaven, I for me wouldn't do half the silly stuff I do, or sin the way I did, or keep repeating the same mentality over and over again. Think and live as citizens of heaven, conducting yourselves in a manner worthy of good news about Christ. Then whether I come and see you again or only hear about you, I know that you are standing together with one spirit, one purpose, fighting together for the faith, which is the good news. The good news is Jesus' rescue plan that saves us from the penalty of sin through his death, burial, and resurrection of him. Don't be intimidated in any way by your enemy. Don't be intimidated by your enemy. Philippi was a Roman city. They were proud of their Roman citizenship. They were proud to be in there. They were very patriotic in their nature. And here they were really loyal to Caesar. And here you have a whole bunch of people who were following Jesus, not really loyal to Caesar, not really loyal to the Roman Empire. So they were getting some heck. They were getting in trouble. They were facing hardships. And he's reminding them, don't be intimidated by your enemy. This will be a sign to them that they are going to be destroyed, but that you are going to be saved even by God himself. It's kind of a foreshadowing. Rome is gone. Their empire is gone. For you have been given not only the privilege of trusting in Christ, but also the privilege of suffering for him. We are in this struggle together. You have seen my struggle in the past, and you know that I'm still in the midst of it. Here he is, he's sitting in his cell, in his place, waiting on his verdict of live or die. And he doesn't know if he's going to live or die. So he's got to begin to think, I may die. What is important in life? For me, to live as Christ and to die as gain. That's another version of the Bible. We read from the NLT just because it's easy for me not to have to explain everything. But to me, living means living for Christ. And dying is even better. Now, if some people hear that, they're like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Dying is even better? Dying is better. How could dying be better? And I understand that. I understand. Right? But don't turn off just yet. Keep considering what life would be like if Christ was living, or you were living for Christ. Your life equaled Christ. When your life's purpose and pleasures are here on earth, of course that sounds really stupid and strange and different. But when your life is centered and purposed and your pleasures are found in Jesus, that's the mindset that changes the place to live. That's the place where where you find that people would consider doing different things like Paul. But consider this. Paul was a tent maker, but his life purpose wasn't to build tents. Paul was a world traveler, but his purpose wasn't to travel the world. Paul was great at relationships, but his purpose wasn't to get more friends. When all of life's purposes, all of his rolled together, the tent making, the traveling, the friendships, were all because he wanted people to know Jesus. Not the opposite. That he wanted to live his life to help them know and understand the saving rescue plan of Jesus. So for Paul, dying didn't mean the end of life's pleasures and of treasures. It didn't mean the end of it. It meant the beginning of it, the reward of it. Because his reward, his pleasures, his purpose were wrapped up in Jesus. And where is Jesus? Jesus is in heaven. And here on earth, we get a glimpse of it. We get a small picture of it. You can see it in beauty. You can see it in goodness. You can see it in good moments and great moments. And moments where people help people. But we don't see a full picture of it. But Paul awaited that perfect picture. And so he was able to say to live is Christ, but to die is gain. To live is everything about Christ. And to die is even better. That's a strange place to get to. But if you consider Jesus as first, that's the only way you can get to the place where dying isn't a loss. Because he wasn't leaving anything behind on earth. He was gaining all of it by going to heaven. I don't know if Andy DeFries was a follower of Jesus or not. They didn't say that in the movie. But what he did do was give people around him hope and purpose. And kind of infuse them with goodness. In a sense, he rescued them. And he pointed some bad things out. We know the movie. Have you seen it 40,000 times? You know it. But he sure changed red. Jesus does that as well. He gives people hope, purpose, and puts goodness in them. Putting Jesus first in your life helps you become a part of that rescue plan and that rescue mission of saving people around you. And it puts Jesus first in your life, makes you want to see others come to know him, come to know his rescue. So how do you put Jesus first in your life? Do you have to run off and do something strange and dangerous? Probably not. Do you have to look psychotic and scream out about judgment on the corner street and be weird? No. No, you don't. You don't have to do that. If you really want to put Jesus first in your life, be kind to everybody you meet. Hold short grudges and forgive fast. If you must get angry, control your anger. If you feed a homeless, feed 12 of them. I love people. Do it well. Think of Jesus often. Do it because you want to put Jesus first. Do you have to sit and you have to quit your job? Do you have to go in your room and pray 47 hours for the week or whatever? No, you don't. Simply begin to live out life. And your work becomes a tool by which you use to love people, to be nice to people, to be friends to people, to share your faith with people. Your talents become the same thing. Your giftedness becomes the same thing. All of your work, your gifts, your talents, your free time becomes a place where you just are able to live like Jesus. Does that come naturally? Does that come easy? No. But it simply becomes a part of following Jesus where you stand every morning and you say, Jesus, live with me. Help me hear your voice and help me obey it. So you simply just say, hey, how can I follow you? How can I obey you today? Can you speak to me today? And begin to think about what that means. And if Jesus puts somebody in your head, whether work, home, or something, try to obey it. Or whatever it is, he puts it in your head. Go do that. And I know that sounds weird at first for some people because it's a very foreign idea if you're just following Jesus for the first time. But he does urge and he does move and he does speak. It's just learning how to hear that voice and follow it. Be a friend. Love people. Speak into them through your action. use words. There are times where you have to speak words. But following Jesus, simply hearing his voice and obeying it and acting on it. Here's what happens. 3 things that happen if you put Jesus in your life, and we'll wrap up. First is putting Jesus first in your life really does give you purpose that is beyond you. It really is. It gives you purpose that is beyond you. It gives you purpose beyond earth. It gives purpose beyond things. You begin to think a little differently. You begin to act a little bit differently and interact differently with people around you. You begin to interact differently with people at work and people in your neighborhood. Could Paul make some awesome tents? Probably, but that wasn't his focus. His focus was using his tents to rescue people to Jesus. So use your talents and your gift. Putting Jesus first in your life a second really does give you strength today and hope for tomorrow. Jesus doesn't promise that we're void of personal struggles and strife, but he does say he's going to walk beside us. The third, putting Jesus first really does give you joy and freedom. Putting Jesus first really does give you joy and freedom. Do some people use Jesus' name for ridicule and judgment? Sure. I wish they wouldn't, but they do. Does he want you to move to holiness and righteousness? Does he want you to move away from your sin and your personal struggle and your prison cell? Yes, he does. But not in a way that brings judgment harshly on others. He wants you to have freedom to follow. Freedom to move. He wants you to have freedom from your struggles, your sin, and your personal prison cell. There's joy in following Jesus, joy in living life and loving people, joy in the purpose it gives you, joy in the freedom it brings. So don't get caught up building your earthly empire and your earthly kingdom, but begin to focus on the kingdom of God. And what I mean by that is the kingdom of God is Jesus' reign and rule on earth and in heaven. And what I mean by that is his let him control. Begin to yield to him. Begin to listen to him. Begin to let him give you control and let him work and move in you. In closing, for me to live as the world, then dying is loss. If for me to live is pleasure, then dying is loss. If for me to live as self, to die is a loss. If for me to live as this world, to die is loss. If for me to live as money, to die is a loss. If for me to live as ambition, to die is loss. But if for me to live as Christ, to die is gain. That's the blessed inheritance we have in following Jesus and being a child of the King, Jesus. That's the greatest thing, the victorious thing, the heavenly thing is ours yet to be. Heaven with Jesus. Because we get heaven with Jesus when we get there. If you want to talk more about this, simply just fill out a card, a Jesus card. I'm not going to make it awkward. I'm not going to make you come stand up here, but I'll simply give you a phone call, buy you a coffee or whatever, and just visit with you about what Jesus is in my life. Because much like Red, I really want to stand at the front and stand at the edge of death and say, I hope I get across that border. Jesus says, I don't even have to hope. It's a guarantee. It's victorious. When you believe in Jesus, you get it. You're there. But I hope to shake his hand and hug him and be with him. I hope that the sea is as beautiful as my dreams, and I can't wait to get there. Because for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. And I hope you'll consider that today. What would your life be like if you began to make steps to let life be Christ?